Audi has been using its E-Tron branding on concept race and road cars since 2009, on machinery as diverse as plug-in A3 and electric R8. Then in 2020, Audi launched its first all-electric production car called just E-Tron. Enter the heart-pumping E-Tron S version, which has just arrived locally in both wagon and coupe-like sportback forms. It arrives with two heroic stats. Firstly, unlike the dual-motor regular E-Tron, the S version comes with 3 electric motors. And secondly, the power trio drums up 370 kilowatts and almost 1,000 Newton meters. Well, 973 to be exact. So, should we uncork it? The E-Tron S has what Audi calls its E-Quattro system, which puts one electric motor on the front axle and then 2 individually on each rear wheel. It's predominantly rear-wheel drive, the front torque only coming in on demand. What this means is it doesn't need a rear differential, and rear torque vectoring is very precise. In normal drive mode, it's 320 kilowatts and 808 Newton meters, which is good for just over 5 seconds for the 0 to 100 km/h sprint. Activate sports mode and you liberate a full 370 kilowatts and 973 Newton meters, and the sprint to the ton drops to 4.5 seconds. Speaking of tonnage, all of that high voltage goodness does pay a penalty at the weighbridge. Both the wagon and the sportback versions apply around 2.7 tonnes to Mother Earth, which makes that 4.5 second claim all the more remarkable. The 95 kilowatt lithium-ion battery that makes up most of the floor weighs heavily into that equation, but also, understandably, the E-Tron S comes with a lot of standard equipment. The wagon version starts at $168,400, and if you want the coupe-like sportback, you're going to have to pry another $7,000 out of the piggy bank. Huge 21-inch alloys with 285mm rubber and adaptive air suspension are standard, as are a new digital matrix LED headlight system. But unlike some EVs, it's not a bespoke chassis. It sits on Volkswagen Group's MLB Evo architecture that it shares with Q5. And that's just one area where the E-Tron S feels intrinsically familiar to those who know Audi's ICE vehicles. The interior has some specific E-Tron S elements, such as the content of the virtual cockpit instrumentation, but really its design doesn't fall very far from Audi's conventional tree. You get fully electric Valcona sport seats, 4-zone climate control, and dual stack displays with touchscreen infotainment on top and a haptic touchpad just below it. There's also other stuff like the head-up display, 360-degree camera system, panoramic sunroof, and B&O sound. But a lot of that stuff can be had in other Audi models. Audi's digital wing mirrors are a $3,500 option, and that's a good thing because if you're like me, you'll prefer the trusty old school stuff. In terms of family-friendly practicality, you get 660 litres of luggage space in the wagon and 615 in the sportback. When you first get in, the E-Tron S feels quite hefty, but get it out on the open road and it does tend to shrink around you. There's a nice clean edge to it, but that inertia is ever present when you start tipping it into the corners. It does hook in with plenty of grip, and it's quite a fluid thing to flow between apexes. In some ways, because of its smooth delivery, it doesn't feel like 1,000 Newton meters, and some of that is the 2.7 tons, sort of taking a bit of the edge off the acceleration. And those broad 285mm Contis drill in a lot of mechanical grip. The response is very linear and progressive, and there are 3 stages of brake regeneration, although they are quite mild increments between its least and most effective modes. And there's no regeneration mode that's really strong enough for proper one-pedal driving around town. The Sport adaptive air suspension is very impressive, and that there's plenty of body control and compliance. It really hangs onto the mass well. But the single most impressive thing in sport mode is the overtaking punch. It's just so immediate and linear. The steering's clear and direct and there's decent communication through the hips. But let's not kid ourselves, this is no sports car. It's a good thing that despite the performance, Audi wasn't tempted to put an RS badge on the E-Tron S and save it, hopefully, for something that sheds a few more pounds. It's also, as you expect, very quiet, and it suits the theme of the E-Tron S. Big, luxurious, comfortable, quiet and torquey. This road loop from Cooma to Wagga Wagga across the famed Snowy Mountains really suits the E-Tron S's grand touring chops well. Out here you can really flex its muscles, and it proves to be very quick point to point, and comfortably so while it's doing it. But whether or not it's really fit for purpose for this kind of touring really hinges on maximum range. Audi quotes 413 kilometres of range for the wagon and 418 for the slightly slipperier Sportback. That's NEDC. And regardless of how much performance you want to apply, any EV worth its salt in this day and age really needs to start with a range beginning with 4. And while its range claim is acceptable, it's far from benchmarking, particularly in the real world, where range more accurately starts with a 3. A real sweetener though, is you do get 6 years of complimentary fast DC charging through the ChargeFox network. How long does it take to recharge? Well, anywhere between 15 minutes and 40 hours, depending on what infrastructure you're using. On 150 kilowatt DC fast charging, you get an 80% charge in half an hour or a full charge in 45. On 11 kilowatt 3-phase household, it's more like 8.5 hours. The E-Tron S is a compelling dose of performance electrification in a format that's both familiar and friendly. It's certainly not E-weird for the sake of it, and normality is a big part of its charm. Nigh on 1,000 Newton meters is a big draw card, and I think once you get a taste of it, it'd be hard to go back to normal EVs. So what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.